morning, everyone. As I mentioned in the class earlier, today we'll have a special guest lecturer to come and talk to us about a very, very interesting and very important issue on assessing the corruption risk of proposed laws, which has been done in various countries all around the world, and Thailand is exploring that as well. So today we have the opportunity to be listening to a lecture by Tobias A.
Thank you so much, Tropos, for that great introduction, and thank you everyone for being here and for spending this time with me. Please have happy Friday morning to you. It is a happy Thursday evening to me here in Washington, but I'm delighted to stay up a little past my bedtime to spend a little time with you. I've had a chance to talk to Tropos a little bit about what you are studying, and I think it's very exciting that you're studying corruption from different angles and learning about different approaches and philosophies about corruption. I think corruption is one of the big challenges of our times. I think that's not only true in Thailand, it's also true in the United States. It's true in governments around the world. Commend you for being interested in this field, and I hope that we have an opportunity to learn together a little more about one particular approach to corruption and how to combat it. So what is corruption? The problem of corruption is generally, like, there are many different definitions. The sort of the one that I like the best is its misuse of public power for private ends. This is a pretty broad definition, I think, but I think it's one that does make sense. One thing that I want to note about corruption is that this particular definition is actually broad enough that it encompasses not only sort of using your public office to benefit yourself or to benefit your friends or your family or your allies, but it also encompasses using public power simply to achieve your own sort of private policy or political goals. And what I mean by that is, like, corruption under this definition would also cover things like unlawful discrimination. And so the solution to that, so the reason that can come about is that laws can be interpreted or enforced in more than one way. And so when you have laws that can be interpreted or enforced in more than one way, the government actors have the flexibility to pick the way that they want to act, pick the version of the law that works better for them under the circumstance, and they can exploit those choices. And so the whole topic here of corruption risk analysis is tackling that kind of problem. Like, how do we identify laws that have too much discretion, and what do we do about them to prevent them from being enacted, and how do we address those problems? The next level answer here is that we have to have some kind of system of corruption proofing. We should think about the laws in advance, provide scrutiny, detect and address provisions that could lead to corruption. So the NDI guide has some recommendations. One recommendation is that we start this process fairly early in the stage parliamentary procedure. Like, ideally, before a bill is considered in committee, the CRA is performed, it's made available to the public, and the sponsors of the legislation have a chance to consider it and circulate a response. And that response could be, we disagree with this and that. The response could be, we should change the bill in these ways to address these concerns. But it's important that there be some circulation of the CRA and some ability of the people moving the legislation to revise the legislation accordingly. We need to integrate the corruption risk analysis into parliamentary procedures in order to make sure that it has systemic institutional effects. And so many parliaments already have different mechanisms for different kinds of expert analysis to be funneled into the system. For example, in the US we have, and elsewhere we have, like a budget impact assessment that is mandatory for legislation. Like, if a budget office, they have to prepare a budget estimate, or a regulatory impact. And we have experts that have to sort of identify, like, what's the regulatory impact of this legislation, or what's the impact, what kind of paperwork does this impose on everyday people. We have all of these kinds of requirements, and so having a corruption risk analysis is just another kind of requirement that we can impose. What kinds of issues are covered in a corruption risk analysis? So we're going to go through these fairly quickly in the interest of time, but I do want to give you a flavor of what these things are. And so there are 8 different issues that we flag in a CRA, or we recommend that are flagged in the CRA. I've grouped them here into 3 different categories. So the first category, which has 5 different sorts of issues to it that are all related, they all involve the law is providing potentially too much discretion. And I'll give examples of what that can look like and how perhaps we could fix it. There's too much discretion, and so that ends up leading the government official with an opportunity to tailor how they want to enforce or carry out the law. They have choices that they can exploit for their own personal benefit. But I think it's actually a very powerful example of enforcement risk where there's potentially too much discretion. It's about drunk driving. It says that if there's a reason to suspect that the driver is drunk, the officer must administer a breathalyzer, and if the result is greater than a particular percentage, the officer must confiscate the driver's license. So this does not give very much discretion to the officer, but compare a situation where the law says instead, if there's reason to suspect the driver is drunk, the officer may administer a breathalyzer and may confiscate the driver's license. If we give the officer power, we also give the officer opportunities to do things for their own purposes. And that is what we would consider to be corruption, or at least a risk of corruption. So I'm not going to tell you that the version on the left is absolutely better policy, but I am going to tell you that it does reduce the risk of corruption. I hope you could, by walking through this example with you. And then there are other examples where we're simply using terms that are ambiguous or unclear, and that allows the government officer to have discretion as well. So for example, ethics sort of statute. A senior government official may not accept an excessive gift unless it is from a family member or close friend. We're giving flexibility to someone to play favorites or potentially to leverage the law for their own end. What kind of gift is excessive? What is a close friend? What does it mean that someone's a close friend as opposed to just a friend? Another issue is when you have 2 different laws that operate slightly differently, but they overlap, and it's not clear how they're intended to interact with each other. So as an example of that, suppose we have a business tax act that says every business must pay an annual tax that is $100 for each employee. And then we have another act that is the Restaurant Tax Act that says every business that is a restaurant must pay a tax of $50 for each employee. And it's because these 2 laws are operating in a way that is inconsistent with each other. It's not clear how they're supposed to work. And that can lead to the tax collector, in this case, to be able to kind of pick which outcome they want in a way that could be used to benefit the tax collector themselves. Another issue that can arise that also provides discretion is when it's not clear who is the actor who's responsible for taking action. And so who actually is supposed to review it? At what level of government, at what level, or at what ministry, for what purpose, comes at what I think is a very, very important topic, which is oversight. Who is responsible for providing oversight? Suppose we have a statute that allows making the Ministry of Education to make grants. And the statute says that to promote education, the minister can make grants to the organizations and in the amounts that the minister considers appropriate. And the only oversight mechanism here is that in January of each year, the minister is supposed to report to Parliament on the total number and total amount of grants awarded. So this is not very much oversight, right? And we're giving the minister, first of all, we're giving the minister like a tremendous amount of discretion. So the question is like, who is going to be in charge of like making sure that this grant program is being carried out for legitimate public purposes? Ideally, that would be expressed in law somewhere. We would have a law that would have different kinds of reporting measures, accountability measures, maybe audits, transparency. It would be ideally we would have all of those things, but at least some measure of some of those things would be useful. And then there's what we call substantive risk, which is the law actually directly provides a corrupt benefit or burden. So it's not that there's too much discretion, it's that the law is embedding in it like some particular entities or groups are being favored in an unjust way, or some particular groups are being disfavored in an unjust way, and there doesn't seem to be any like societal public policy justification for it. So that's substantive risk. And then the last 2 items are process risk, and these are things that can happen when a law is drafted drafted in a way that is not fair. The law is drafted in a corrupt way. It's drafted either in secret or in a one-sided manner, and so there are flaws in sort of the process that and that tends to present a risk of corruption as well. Yes, corruption is a challenge. Yes, there are corrupt people and they need to be caught and punished. But all of these, for all of the different reasons that I've discussed, there are systemic issues that can also lead to either corrupt behavior or behavior that appears to be corrupt, but may not be sufficiently addressed in the legal system, and may lead to people being able to engage in that corrupt behavior but not be held accountable for it because it was arguably within the discretion that they had. So a corruption risk analysis, which would go through these factors and would be shared with parliaments in the process, is a very powerful tool. A number of countries have incorporated this tool and are using it effectively. It can be incorporated in the system in Thailand, and it can be done in a variety of ways. And as I said at the top, all of this is an art and not a science. And there's not any one right answer that is best, but all of these things can contribute in powerful ways to making laws that are less prone to corruption.